He shall flee, verse 4, to one of these 6 cities and shall stay there. Verse 6, he shall remain in that city of refuge until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is high priest at that time. As long as the high priest who would serve, it was a hereditary job, and you'd serve for a number of years. It's not quite clear how long a high priest served for. It could be a few years, it could be longer. You had to stay in the city of refuge, hiding out from the guy you killed's brother, until the death of the high priest. And if he died in office, when he died, then it seemed to be assuming in this early stage that it was a lifelong appointment, but later on it wasn't. If he was a young man who'd just been appointed high priest, well, you're going to be in that city of refuge for maybe the rest of your life. But if it's an old man, then maybe a few years, and then you can go home, and the brother of the guy you killed can't kill you anymore. His rights of revenge are finished the minute the high priest dies. So it's a way of dealing with unintentional homicide in an age without prisons. That's number one. So that's interesting, just the way they arrange their society. Now, chapter 21, another group of cities are talked about. Then the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites came to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua the son of Nun and to the heads of the fathers' houses. And they said, they come to the elders, the Lord commanded through Moses that we be given cities to dwell in, along with their pasture lands for our cattle. When Joshua divided up the land, all the 12 tribes got allocations. They're all farmers or shepherds, but not the Levites. Levi is one of the 12 tribes. They are the hereditary priestly family. God says everyone gets a portion, but not the Levites, because I am their portion. Their job is to take care of the central shrine. That became the Temple of Jerusalem. But we don't need, the whole tribe of Levi isn't needed constantly to minister at the shrine. Therefore, the Levites will be given Levitical cities, cities made up of priests and their wives and families. And the priests, when they're not officiating at the temple, may be shepherds. They may be cattlemen. They may be farmers. So those cities will have outlying lands where they can earn a living when they're not priesting, which really wasn't a paid thing. My great-great-great-grandfather was a rabbi in this town in 1852, but the synagogue where he officiated was so poor, they couldn't pay him. So he volunteered, and then he had a hoop skirt factory on King Street, which is still there, and that's how he earned a living and could give time to being the rabbi of the temple. It was unpaid clergy, as the Mormons. I mean, any Mormon bishop will be a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman because they don't pay them. And that's how the Levites were. So the Levites have to be given cities with outlying lands, pasture lands, it says, for their inheritance. And that's how they supported their clergy. All right, so that's also interesting. And then every once in a while, a Levite would get a letter in the local Levitical city he lived in. And it would say, priest so-and-so, you are called upon to go up to Jerusalem next month for 2 weeks to provide the following service. Either you're going to take care of the incense, you're going to slaughter animals, you're going to keep the bread fresh. There was a gold table with 12 fresh loaves of bread that were changed every day, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. You're going to polish the gold menorah, the candlestick, and it took a lot of polishing. That room, that was all gold inside, and it needed a lot of upkeep. So for 2 weeks you're going to do that, then you'll come back and you'll be a shepherd or whatever you are for the next year, and then you'll get another call later on. So those are the cities they lived in. Chapter 22, a terrible crisis. I find it very interesting. It's so alien to current religious practice, where we have churches on every corner, especially in the Holy City, so-called, because there's a church on virtually every corner. Chapter 22, it also has an influence of the Deuteronomic historian in it. Because one of the points of the Deuteronomic historians was worship must be centralized in one place. Now, two of the tribes, when they were coming from Egypt, you recall this from a few weeks ago, they were going through Moab, and they went to Moses. And they said, Moses, this is fine land for raising cattle over here on the east side of the Jordan. We want to settle here. We don't want to go into Canaan proper, across the Jordan. And Moses said, wait a minute, fellas. God has given us the Holy Land, which is on the other side of the Jordan. You're rejecting a gift by God. You can't do that. And here's another point. Your two tribes can't stay here and settle down because your brethren of the other 10 tribes are about to have a military attack on Canaan. They're going into battle. Many of them will be killed. And you won't be there with them to support your brethren. I can't let you have land over on this side. And they said, well, but we raise cattle. That's what we do. And this is perfect land for cattle. I'll tell you what, Moses, this is what we'll do. We'll cross the Jordan with our brethren of the other 10 tribes. And we will fight. Not only will we fight to win Canaan, we'll be the shock troops. We'll be in the front of the battle. And we'll fight heroically. And then when the battle is over and Canaan is ours, let us come back, cross the Jordan back to the east side, which is present-day Kingdom of Jordan, opposite Israel. Across the Jordan is the dividing line. And then we'll settle down here. But we will fight with our brethren to get the land which the Lord our God has given them. So Moses said, well, under those circumstances, fine. So now, at the end of Joshua, the Israelites have fought successfully. They have the promised land. And Joshua calls, chapter 22, verse 1, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. That's half of the Joseph tribe. Those are the two and a half tribes that wanted to settle on the east bank of the Jordan. And he says, okay, boys, you did your work. You did fight heroically, and we have won. Now you can go back. Verse 4, now that the Lord your God has given rest to your brethren, as he promised them, therefore, turn and go to your home across the Jordan River in the east, to the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. You've done your part of the bargain, now we're going to do ours. All right, they gather their families and everything they have, and they cross the Jordan going east, and they settle on the east bank of the Jordan. Verse 10, skip to 10. But a crisis will emerge here. One so seriously that it almost caused the Israelites to fight each other in a fratricidal conflict over an issue that is hard for us to grasp at all, unless you grasp the Deuteronomic point that you can only worship God in the central shrine, and that is eventually going to be Jerusalem. But wherever it is, it's a central place on the west side of the Jordan, in Israel proper. Chapter 22, verse 10. When those 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe of Manasseh, crossed the Jordan, and they came to the region on the east that lies in the land of Canaan, actually, they haven't got there yet. The land of Canaan is on the west side of the Jordan, so they're about to cross to the east. But the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by the Jordan. Now, if I read this correctly, the altar is on the west side of the Jordan in Israel proper. But they're going to live right across the river on the west side, on the east side. They built an altar on the west side right next to the Jordan River, an altar of great size. And the other Israelites heard about this. And they said, behold, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh have built an altar at the frontier of the land, in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. And then they're going to cross over and live on the other side. And when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh, the central shrine before Jerusalem, to make war against them. 8.5 tribes are going to fight the 2.5. This is a very dangerous situation. Now why? Why do they care if these people want to build an altar? A local altar for themselves? Because it would be a rival to the central shrine, now at Shiloh and later to be at Jerusalem. And that could get the religion could be watered down to be a combination of what we call syncretism, a combination of two or more religions in which the God of Israel is worshipped together with pagan gods. Too dangerous. We can't allow it. And since one of the Deuteronomic points is centralization of worship at all cost, they explain why they're ready to make war and wipe out these fellow Israelites because of this altar. Verse 17. Have we not had enough of the sin of Peor? What is the sin of Peor? Take a look. Numbers chapter 25, verses 3 through 5. I mean, I could just tell you, but this is much better way to find it. You've got to find it in the Bible itself. Numbers 25, verses 3 through 5 is the story of how the Israelites were seduced at Peor to worship pagan gods. Chapter 25 of Numbers. While Israel dwelt in Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. They're in Moab, haven't crossed into Israel yet, and there are a lot of very nice-looking Moabite ladies, women. And they're seducing the Israelite men to worship their pagan gods. These daughters of Moab invited the people Israel to the sacrifices of their pagan gods. And the people ate and bowed down to their gods. Well, they were trying to be friendly to these girls. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor. There's Baal, the nature god, with his sex orgies and his murder of children and all kinds of horrible things going on in that religion. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And he's about to destroy them. And everyone who gets involved with Baal of Peor is killed. All right, so now we know what the sin of Peor is. The elders in Shiloh are afraid that if we let these people build an altar for their 2.5 tribes way over there by the Jordan, which is quite a journey in those days, we'll totally lose control of their religion. They'll start to worship Baal and other nature gods, and we won't be able to control it, and the whole future of Israel will be destroyed because if we allow paganism in our midst, even if it involves 2.5 tribes, God will destroy us all. Collective guilt. Look at the end of verse 18. If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. Now, why do you need an altar, you guys over there? Verse 19. If you think that because you're living on the other side of the Jordan, therefore you're in an impure land, it's not holy land, and that's why you've built an altar just inside the holy part, across the Jordan. Verse 19, then move back. Now, if your land over there in east of the Jordan River is unclean, then come back, pass over into the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands at Shiloh, and take for yourselves a possession among us, and leave off this idea of having your own territory east of the Jordan. Or, if you build an altar out there, you become rebels against God, and we will destroy you. Now, the 2.5 tribes have got to think very quickly to come up with an excuse. If they don't, the rest of the Israelites are going to swoop down on them and kill them. A civil war between Israelites, a disaster. So they come up with a cute excuse that I think is bull. But see if you buy it. I may tell you I'm about the only person who believes this. Most people say, it wasn't really an altar, it's what they said it was. I don't buy that. Verse 26. Here are the 2.5 tribes making an excuse for building the altar. Well, let's start with verse 24. We're not rebels against God. This is 22:24. Nay, but we did it. We built this altar for fear that in time to come your children, the descendants of the Israelites who went into Israel proper, might say to our children who live outside the technical boundaries of the Holy Land on the east side of the Jordan, your kids will say to our kids, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? You don't live in the land of Israel. For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between you and us. The Reubenites, the Gadites, you have no portion in the Lord. So your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore, against that danger, we said, let us prevent that. Let us now build, verse 26, an altar. Not for burnt offering. No. Not a real altar. Just no sacrifices. We understand that can only be done at the central shrine. But as a kind of model of an altar, to be a witness between us and you. So you'll have the real altar at Shiloh, and wherever else you want to put it eventually, Jerusalem, and we'll have a copy of the altar here, which we will not use. We'll just look at it, and that'll tie us visually, at least, to the real altar in Shiloh. It'll be a witness, verse 27, between us and you, and between the generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings when we go to Shiloh to do it. But lest your children say to our children in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord, we thought, if this should be said to us or to our descendants in time to come, we should say, wait a minute, behold the copy of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings, no, nor for sacrifice, but just to be a symbolic witness between us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord. I think that's exactly what they were doing, by building an altar for burnt offering. But it's just a model. And verse 33, the people of Israel, the majority living in the Holy Land, were pleased by this answer, and they believed it. They swallowed it. And they spoke no more about making war against their brethren. Well, whether or not it's true, I doubt, but it served to prevent a civil war. So what you got to do, you got to do. I think it's a cute story, so I wanted to tell it. All right, now.
Had an altar like that been built before?
No. It's ridiculous, a model altar. It's like saying, I want to have a Cadillac car, you've got one, so I'm going to build one out of clay just as a model so that I'm connected to you. It's stupid. But that's, I have a kind of pixie-like sense of humor, and this strikes me as very disingenuous. Yeah, in those days, everybody put altars everywhere. But now that you have this Deuteronomic idea of centralizing worship, it wasn't a sin before, now it is. Sins change. All right, chapter 23. Now we're back to the heavily edited Deuteronomic material. Chapters 23 and 24 talk about covenant renewal ceremonies, where Joshua, at the end of his life, assemble all the tribes. They have rest from war now, or mostly. And he wants to renew the covenant. It said in Deuteronomy that every 7 years you should renew the covenant. Well, they probably did it more often. Today you have the Jewish high holy days of Rosh Hashanah, which means the head of the year, the Jewish New Year in the fall, and then Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, 10 days later. But that really is a covenant renewal exercise where the Jews get together and they renew their relationship with God. And in a sense, they crown God King of Israel all over again for another year. They read what's called Malchuyot verses, 9 verses from the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, talking about God as king. God was king, God is king, God shall always be king, and we Israelites are the subjects of his kingdom, which is the people Israel. So it's entirely possible that the Jewish New Year today, so widely observed by Jews, had its origin in a covenant renewal ceremony and an annual crowning of God as King of Israel. So let's take a look at perhaps the first of these covenant renewal ceremonies. Moses, of course, sealed the covenant at Mount Sinai, 1290 or so BC. This is, well, maybe a half century later, maybe more. And Joshua, Moses' successor, has got, before he dies, to seal this covenant, to get them to renew it for the new generation. Chapter 23. A long time afterward, so Joshua is probably a very old man, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their enemies round about, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, their elders and heads, their judges and officers, and said to them, now did he get everybody in the country? Probably just the tribal chiefs, the judges and heads, the officers. He summoned them, and he said, and this book loves this phrase, I'm now old, and if you hadn't noticed that, I'm also well advanced in years. And you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. So point number one of the covenant renewal. Before you did anything, God fought for you. That's the initial act of grace. God found Israel. God created Israel. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, I found it, with a fish for the Christ fish. Not right. It should have said, he found me. In the Bible, God is a God who comes down and he finds us. He seeks us out. We hide from him, as in the Garden of Eden. And the man and his wife hid from the Lord because they were naked and were ashamed. We're naked. We're sinners. And we're ashamed. We say, oh, I wish I could believe in God, say some atheists. I think they're running from God as fast as they can get away from him. He seeks us out. The religious person experiences not I found it. First of all, God is not an it. He's a person. But, at least according to our tradition, maybe a personification of being itself, but we understand him as person, loving, caring, etc. And who hears prayers. That's the tradition. We don't find him, he finds us. We're sinners, we make mistakes, we try to be righteous, and we have some success, but he has to fill in the rest with his grace to forgive the sins that we find impossible to expunge. Yes?
I would argue that it can work either way, because you have examples in the Bible with Jethro and Cain, where Cain was sent wandering, and Jethro says to Moses, now I know that God is God. So these were people, and Jethro specifically was a priest.
What, doesn't he know it because God revealed it to him? How do some people know God and some people don't? There are two theories here. One is that God reveals himself equally to everybody, universal revelation. But some of us listen and some don't.
Well, some people see burning bushes everywhere, like Moses, and some people don't.
Yes, that's right. So I would say you're correct that the relationship between humanity and God is a two-way street. The story that Abraham's father got halfway to the promised land is instructive. He leaves Ur of the Chaldeans. He says he's heading for Canaan. But he gets to Haran, still in Mesopotamia, and there he stops. And then Abraham, his son, is sitting in front of his house or tent one day, and God comes to him. And he says, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave your native land and go to a land I'll show you. God comes to fetch him. We can get halfway there, but God meets us halfway and takes us the rest of the way. In Abraham's father's, he had to do that. He had to walk first, and then God picked him up and carried him the rest. But in many cases, God found Abraham. He had no good deeds. He'd done nothing. He just chose him. That's grace. So grace and good works combine in salvation. Does a person have the ability to cooperate in his own salvation? Yes, by really trying to be a righteous, decent human being. But we never make it completely, and that's God's grace taking us the rest of the way. Whether the grace precedes the deeds or the deeds precede the grace depends on your theory. Yes?
Grace, in other words, salvation has not yet come to the people.
Well, they thought it did. I mean, from certain kinds of Christian point of view, grace didn't come till Jesus Christ. That's what Paul says. But obviously, the Old Testament people didn't believe that. They thought that chen, v'chesed, v'rachamim, grace and loving kindness and mercy, were coming from God to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Moses.
Chosen.
Yes. And he made the choice. And he chose Abraham before he'd done any good deeds. But then Abraham did good deeds. So it's a combination here of God's acting and human beings acting. And we have to cooperate. And when we do, I guess that's what we call salvation, whatever that may mean. All right. Again?
We'll discuss it later.
All right. Okay. So the Lord has fought for you. That's number one. You didn't conquer this country out of your own strength, because God gives you health and strength so you can conquer it. And he told you what to do. Behold, verse 4, I have allotted to you as an inheritance for your tribes those nations that remain. So he acknowledges that a lot of the Canaanites have not been displaced. Along with, that's the earlier tradition before the Deuteronomists cleaned it all up. But the earlier one's more accurate. Those nations that remain have not yet been conquered along with all the nations that I have already cut off, given to you. So there are two categories of pagan cities. Some of them have been conquered by the Israelites and some not yet. So it goes on. The conquest goes on. Excuse me. Verse 5. The Lord your God will push them back before you and drive them out of your sight, and you shall possess their land. As the Lord your God promised you, he keeps his promises. We break the covenant from our side. We will be your people. And God says, then I'll be your God. But even if we fail to do God's will, his promise is unbreakable. Therefore, verse 6, be very steadfast to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, meaning Deuteronomy. That's the Deuteronomic historian saying, this book recently discovered was in fact written by Moses, and you have to obey it. And if you do, he will displace the remaining pagan tribes before you. But if you don't, you're going to be displaced. It depends on what you do. Turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left. That's a Deuteronomic formula. That you may not be mixed with these nations left here among you, or make mention of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down yourselves to them. But cleave to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. It doesn't say those gods don't exist. He just says Israelites are forbidden to worship them. For the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations, and as for you, no man has been able to withstand you to this day. You think you did that yourself? You were slaves a generation ago. One man of you puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, as he promised you. This doesn't just happen. Take good heed to yourselves, therefore, to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and join the remnant of these pagan nations left here among you, and make marriages with them, so that you marry their women and they yours, know assuredly that the Lord your God will not continue to drive out these nations. Why shouldn't you marry non-Israelite? Because they're going to get you to worship their gods. But they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a scourge on your sides and thorns in your eyes, till you perish the threat from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. Your possession of this land is conditional. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God. And he's lent it to you as long as you obey him. Verse 14, Joshua concludes, and now I am about to go the way of all the earth. And you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one thing has failed of all the good things which the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you, not one of them has failed. But just as all the good things which the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things, until he has destroyed you from off this good land which the Lord your God has given. And now here's the if-then sentence. If you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods, and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off the good land which he has given to you. So it couldn't possibly be clearer. What God does is conditional on what we do. He'll never break his covenant. He'll always be with us, but that being with us may involve a punishment. A parent who punishes a child for running and playing in the traffic continually, the time will come when he's going to say, you continue doing it. He might even slap the child. But if you don't learn that lesson, then you're not going to, I'll take your cell phone away or your television privileges or whatever else kids like. So it doesn't mean he doesn't love his child, but it means he desperately wants him to live, not die, by going and playing in the street. And if the kid can't get the message, then you knock him around a little bit. And that's what God does. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love Israel. It means this is tough love. And parents do it, and God does it, the ultimate parent. All right, we'll break, and then we're going to start next week. We'll sum up chapter 24, which is a much more detailed description of what may be a separate meeting, or it may be an extension of the same meeting. We're not sure. We don't know. But it's another one of these covenant renewal ceremonies. All right, if you know anyone in class who wants to come to that Seder but isn't here tonight, mention it to them, and we'll have a sign up next week too, and so we can look forward to that.